Cannabis Common Sense, the show that tells the truth about marijuana and the politics behind its prohibition.
Hello and welcome to another exciting edition of Cannabis Common Sense. We have a long hemp news segment tonight. I was off in Texas visiting my mom last week, just in time for the snowpocalypse in Texas. They had an electric, water, and heat emergency down there where temperature actually dropped to 2 below zero one day, a new record. Anyway, at the same time we had pretty heavy snows and ice here in the Northwest that we're still recovering from. But we are going to go on with the show and stay tuned for our hemp newscast. First, we're going to bring out our infamous dancing cannabis leaves.
I feel the force.
Our first hemp news story tonight is about jobs in America. Jobs in the state licensed legal cannabis industry rose by 32% during the past 12 months, and the industry now employs over 321,000 full-time workers. According to its 2021 report, the regulated cannabis industry added approximately 78,000 new jobs over the past year. Authors of the report acknowledged that the industry's increased growth was especially notable because it occurred in, quote, a year marked by global pandemic, spiking unemployment, and economic recession. Outside the cannabis industry, the U.S. economy shrank by 3.5%. The unemployment rate almost doubled, and nearly 10 million Americans saw their jobs disappear, end quote. To put the 2021 job totals in perspective, the authors write, quote, in the United States, there are now more legal cannabis workers than electrical engineers. There are more legal cannabis workers than EMTs and paramedics. There are more than twice as many legal cannabis workers as there are dentists, end quote. States adding the greatest number of jobs in the cannabis-related field were California with 23,707 jobs, Florida with 14,891 jobs, Michigan with 9,216 jobs, Illinois with 8,348 new jobs. Overall, the total number of full-time jobs in the licensed cannabis industry has risen nearly threefold since 2017. Cannabis sales similarly reached all-time highs in 2020, bringing in record levels of tax revenue. During a year that saw many sectors of the American economy constrict, we witnessed historic economic growth in the legal cannabis industry. The dramatic rise in the number of players participating in the state legal cannabis space and in total sales is a result of more consumers transitioning from the illicit market to the above-ground legal marketplace. As more legal markets come on board and mature, consumers are going to continue to gravitate toward it and away from the underground marketplace. In Washington, D.C., Judge Merrick Garland, the Biden administration's nominee for U.S. Attorney General, signaled on Monday that he would not use the Justice Department resources to interfere in the majority of states that have legalized marijuana for either medical or adult use purposes. Garland indicated during his Senate nomination hearing that under his direction, the Justice Department is unlikely to get involved in states where cannabis is legal, a policy first outlined by the Obama administration but later rescinded in 2018 by President Trump's former Attorney General Jeff Sessions. Garland said in response to a question posed by Democratic Senator Cory Booker of New Jersey, quote, it does not seem to me useful the use of limited resources that we have to be pursuing prosecutions in states that have legalized and are regulating the use of marijuana either medically or otherwise. I do think we need to be sure that there are no in-runs around the state laws that criminal enterprises are doing. That kind of enforcement should be continued, but I don't think it's a good use of our resources where states have already authorized and it only confuses people, obviously, within the state, end quote. These comments ought to be reassuring to those employed by the growing state-regulated cannabis industry and to those millions of Americans who rely upon it. That said, such a hands-off policy is little more than a short-term band-aid. The long-term solution is for Congress to deschedule cannabis, thereby repealing the failed federal policies of marijuana prohibition and eliminating the existing state-federal conflict. Also in Washington, D.C., this week, 37 members of Congress, led by the Congressional Cannabis Caucus co-chairs Barbara Lee of California and Portland, Oregon's own Earl Blumenauer, including Judiciary Committee Chairman Jerry Nadler, sent a letter to President Biden calling upon him to issue a blanket pardon to those with federal nonviolent marijuana offenses. The lawmakers wrote, quote, "You have a unique ability to lead on criminal justice reform and provide immediate relief to thousands of Americans. Your administration has the power to issue a general pardon to all former federal nonviolent cannabis offenders in the United States and trigger resentencing for all those who remain federally incarcerated on nonviolent cannabis-only offenses for activity now legal under state law," end quote. The lawmakers' letter concluded, quote, "During your campaign, you committed that you would, quote, automatically expunge all past marijuana convictions for use and possession," end quote. "Therefore, we urge you to grant executive clemency to all nonviolent cannabis offenders. We look forward to working with you and the incoming Attorney General on quickly making this a reality," end quote. We're tremendously grateful for the leadership of the Cannabis Caucus, particularly Representative Barbara Lee and Portland's Earl Blumenauer, as they tirelessly lead this ongoing but hopefully soon to be finished fight for marijuana justice nationwide. President Biden's leadership on issuing pardons to nonviolent federal marijuana offenders would demonstrate a down payment on his campaign promise to prioritize criminal justice reform and inspire similar justice-oriented actions in nonpartisan fashion around the country. Shortly after President Biden's election, the House of Representatives voted to end the federal prohibition of marijuana. Now, in a new legislative session, President Biden should follow their lead and move to immediately provide relief to those who continue to suffer from a criminal record for a nonviolent federal marijuana offense. There's legal and scholarly support for the administration's use of blanket pardon powers. Such actions were previously taken by Presidents Ford and Carter. One of the most common uses of systemic pardons in the United States history has been to heal the wounds of war at home. Carter and Ford pardoned Vietnam draft dodgers. For many years, the United States, we've been engaged in a war on drugs. Whatever the judgment of history about the virtue, the wisdom, or the success of this war, it's produced some laws and some sentences that are widely perceived to be unwise and unfair. In fact, I have a federal marijuana possession conviction for possessing 2 grams of marijuana in my home back in 1993 is when the conviction happened. The arrest was in 1991. I went through a trial for manufacturing, and I was acquitted of manufacturing in a jury nullification case. But I was convicted of simple possession of marijuana. I'd like to see that expunged, please, President Biden. Down south in Mississippi, a 3/5 majority of Mississippi State Senate approved Senate Bill 2765, which seeks to implement a statewide medical cannabis access program in lieu or replacing the program initially approved by voters on Election Day. That program, Initiative 65, is being legally challenged before Mississippi Supreme Court and would be nullified if the litigation is successful. Mississippi Senate Bill 2765 would only take effect if the Supreme Court strikes down Initiative 65. 73% of the voters decided in favor of Initiative 65 in Mississippi last November. Senate Bill 2765 is similar to I-65 in some ways. It permits qualified patients to access up to 2.5 ounces of medical cannabis per 14-day period, the same possession limits outlined in the voter-approved measure. The bill also includes broad student housing and parental protection for patients and would tax medical cannabis sales at 7%. Lawmakers previously tried and failed to persuade voters to adopt a legislatively backed medical cannabis program. They put Measure 65A in opposition to Measure 65. Mississippi voters in November rejected that proposal in favor of Measure 65. The ongoing legal dispute over 65 is the result of a challenge filed by representatives of the city of Madison, Mississippi, including the town's mayor. The suit argues that the legislature's failure to update guidelines for petitioners should invalidate the initiative vote. Specifically, state statutes call for petitioners to gather an equal percentage of signatures from 5 congressional districts. However, following redistricting in 2000, 21 years ago, there are only 4 congressional districts in the state. However, lawmakers never complained about initiatives since then. Lawmakers since that time have failed to update the statute, too. Nonetheless, litigants have not similarly challenged the validity of a separate initiative that also appeared on the 2020 ballot, or the validity of prior ballot measures, despite the fact that petitioners for those initiatives acted no differently than did those who advocated for the medical marijuana measure. Separate lawsuits in Montana and South Dakota are also seeking to overturn marijuana legalization election outcomes in those states. South Dakota's litigation was filed at the behest of the state's Republican governor, Kristi Noem. On Monday, a South Dakota Circuit Court judge sided with the governor's office and determined that the election results should be nullified. That decision is expected to be appealed to South Dakota's Supreme Court. Opponents of a 2020 Nebraska medical marijuana ballot initiative succeeded in removing the measure from the ballot just weeks before Nebraskans had an opportunity to cast their vote. Here in Oregon, legislation is pending, Senate Bill 307, to expand veterans' access to medical marijuana. The measure waives fees for obtaining a medical marijuana card for veterans who have a total disability rating of at least 50% as a result of an injury or illness incurred or aggravated during active military service, and who receive discharge or release under other than dishonorable conditions. I'm a disabled veteran with only 30% though. The annual fee is only $20 for me. Senate Bill 307 was heard in the Senate Committee on Health Care on the 17th of February at 1 p.m. Across the river in Washington State, up in Olympia, Washington, Senate Bills 5009 and 5004 would provide a tax exemption on medical marijuana purchased by registered patients from a licensed dispensary until 2025, when it would have to be reauthorized. Senate Bill 5004 was approved by the Senate Committee on Ways and Means on the 17th of February. Earlier this week, Washington's Appropriations Committee executive session confirmed the 22 items with no last-minute additions. Senate SHB 1019, the home grow bill to allow people in Washington state to grow a few plants of their own, was not added to that agenda and will not advance to the floor in the 2021 Washington State legislative session. Going forward, Washington State's Home Grow Coalition members will be following up with the bill's sponsors, committee members, and others in looking ahead to the next chance for the Home Grow bill in the 2022 legislative session. Options for 2022 include amending 1019 or writing a new bill in response to what we learned from the review and new concerns from voters and others expressed to us directly or relayed by legislators. Individuals are encouraged to email info@homegrowwashington.com. That's info@homegrowwashington.com to let organizers know of your willingness to help get meetings with your legislators, since they found that some only willing to engage with constituents in their district. If you are a constituent in Washington State or own a business that would benefit from the new economic market segment that would result from the passage of Home Growing, act now and email today. That's info@homegrowwashington.com. They need your help and want to work with you. Today's lack of advancement to Washington's legislative floor is not a defeat, but rather another step along the way to eventual passage. The work will continue until the bill language is passed that balances the desires and concerns of a majority of the people of Washington State who said they support allowing adults to grow cannabis of their own in their home. Virginia's House of Delegates and Senate lawmakers have passed legislation, House Bill 2218 and Senate Bill 1333, amending the Virginia medical cannabis access law to allow for the production and dispensing of botanical formulations of cannabis. The measure awaits action from Democratic Governor Ralph Northam, who's expected to sign the measure into law. Medical cannabis dispensaries began operating in Virginia in the fall of 2020, about 6 months ago. If the pending legislation is approved, dispensaries are anticipated to have botanical cannabis available for registered patients as early as September of 2021. Separate Virginia legislation seeking to legalize the possession of marijuana by adults and license its retail sales continues to advance in Virginia's legislature. Governor Northam continues to offer his public support for legalization, which is backed, according to recent polls, by 68% of Virginians. In North Dakota, members of the North Dakota House of Representatives this week approved 3 separate bills to significantly amend the state's marijuana laws. All 3 measures will now be transmitted to the Senate for further consideration. House Bill 1420, which allows adults to legally purchase and possess cannabis, was approved by a 56-38 vote. House Bill 1420 permits adults aged 21 or older to possess up to 1 ounce of marijuana. An amendment to the legislation adopted by House lawmakers last week sets a limit on the amount of marijuana that may be purchased from a licensed retailer at 21 grams. Consumers can purchase up to 21 grams, no more than twice per month. House lawmakers also approved a separate measure, House Bill 1501, which imposes a 15% gross receipt tax on adult use marijuana sales. North Dakota's House lawmakers passed that bill by a vote of 73-21. Lawmakers also approved a third piece of legislation, North Dakota's House Bill 1201, by a vote of 58-36. House Bill 1201 further decriminalizes the possession of up to 1 ounce of marijuana, reducing penalties from a criminal infraction to a civil penalty of no more than $50. The measure also reduces penalties for the possession of larger quantities of marijuana. North Dakota's legislation enacted in 2019 partially decriminalized marijuana possession offenses by reclassifying the possession of up to 1/2 ounce of marijuana or the personal possession of marijuana-related paraphernalia for a first-time offender from a criminal misdemeanor punishable by up to 30 days in jail down to a criminal infraction punishable by a fine but no possibility of jail time. A separate measure that would have placed an adult use marijuana ballot measure before voters to weigh in on during the 2022 election was defeated by an 85-9 vote. An activist group in North Dakota has already filed a proposed 2022 adult use marijuana legalization ballot measure. A separate ballot measure to legalize marijuana was narrowly defeated in North Dakota in 2018. In New Jersey, Democratic Governor Phil Murphy this week signed enabling legislation carrying out voters' Election Day demands to legalize adult use marijuana possession and license retail marijuana sales into law. 3 bills were signed by the governor. A21 and S21 licenses the commercial production and retail sale of cannabis to adults. Under the new law, adults may legally purchase and possess up to 1 ounce of cannabis. Retail sales are subject to a state sales tax. 70% of the revenue derived from the sales taxes on retail marijuana purchases will be directed toward reinvestment in designated lower-income communities. The new New Jersey law caps the number of state licensed cultivators at 37 for the first 2 years. Existing state licensed medical cannabis producers will be among those eligible to provide for the retail market. It's been estimated that adult use retailers may be operational within 6 months. New Jersey's Governor Murphy also signed A1897, which removes criminal and civil penalties for private possession of up to 6 ounces of cannabis by those ages 21 and older, as well as for the possession of personal use amounts of hashish up to 170 grams. It also depenalizes activities involving the transfer of up to 1 ounce of cannabis and reduces criminal penalties for activities involving larger quantities, distribution of more than 1 ounce but less than 5 pounds. Governor Murphy also signed a third piece of legislation, A5342. It provides for a series of written warnings rather than imposition of either criminal penalties or fines for those under the age of 21 who are caught with cannabis. Governor Murphy lobbied for the New Jersey measure, which passed lawmakers. Under the measure, third-time juvenile offenders could receive community service. Provisions in the law also restrict police from conducting searches of juveniles based solely on the odor of marijuana. The enactment of these laws is long overdue. State and local police have made over 6,000 arrests for marijuana-related violations in the months since New Jersey voters overwhelmingly decided at the ballot box last November. Now, going forward, tens and thousands of otherwise law-abiding New Jerseyans will no longer be subject to arrest and a criminal record for their personal use of marijuana, and the commercial market will be regulated in a fair and inclusive manner. An analysis of nationwide arrest data published in 2018 reported that New Jersey ranked third in the nation in the total marijuana arrests, second only to Wyoming in per capita marijuana arrests. Provisions in the bill allowing the use and possession of marijuana take effect immediately. On Election Day, New Jersey voters overwhelmingly approved Public Question 1, which instructed lawmakers to enact legislation permitting adults to possess and purchase marijuana from licensed retailers. New Jersey's lawmakers subsequently approved A21, S21, and A1897 on December 17th. After constant delays and disagreements among legislative leaders and Governor Murphy, lawmakers approved A5342 as a compromise cleanup bill this week. While we're pleased to see the will of New Jersey voters finally enshrined into approved legislation, it was a grotesque failure on the part of elected leadership that it took so long to do so. Despite nearly 7 in 10 New Jersey residents voting in favor of legalization on November 3rd, it took lawmakers 111 days following the vote to achieve consensus to enact enabling legislation into law. During this undue delay, over 6,000 New Jersey citizens faced charges for activities most New Jerseyans demanded be legalized. It's our hope that lawmakers and regulators going forward will implement these laws with a renewed sense of urgency. At the same time, New Jersey legislators did not legalize home growing, so New Jersey residents are not allowed to grow their own. This is a gross injustice that hopefully will be resolved soon. North Carolina, a new released poll by Elon University in partnership with the Charlotte Observer, the Durham Herald-Sun, and the Raleigh News and Observer found that 73% of North Carolina voters support the legalization of marijuana for medical purposes, and 54% of North Carolina voters support the legalization of marijuana for recreational use. By contrast, only 20% of North Carolina voters support criminal penalties for marijuana possession, and only 22% say it's morally wrong to use marijuana. I guess, according to that 22%, we're morally wrong. Oh well. Many of those concerns are still held by voters or not substantiated by the available data in the states that have legalized cannabis, from crime rates, traffic incidents, and the gateway theory. Notably, 64% of North Carolina voters said that legalizing marijuana will help the economy. In 2021, it's morally, practically, and politically indefensible to support the ongoing prohibition and criminalization of marijuana. When it comes to legalization, now's the time for leaders of all political stripes to lead, follow, or get the heck out of the way. In a message to the North Carolina voters yesterday, however, their United States Senator Tom Tillis wrote, quote, "I do not support the broad legalization of marijuana for recreational use. However," end quote. However, North Carolina was one of the first states to decriminalize marijuana, and possession of a small amount is a simple infraction. In fact, back during the 70s, they almost decriminalized 113 grams, or a quarter pound. In the medical realm, the adjunctive use of cannabis is associated with improvements in pain and other symptoms in patients with refractory fibromyalgia, according to data published in the journal Cannabis Research. An Italian researcher assessed the long-term use of various types of cannabis preparations, herbal cannabis, oil extracts, etc., in a cohort of 38 patients with treatment-resistant fibromyalgia. Participants in the study consumed cannabis for up to 12 months in combination with their prescribed medications. The authors reported that, quote, "significant improvements were observed," end quote, following the initiation of cannabis therapy in most patients. Participants were most likely to report reductions in pain, as well as declines in their disability index and overall symptom severity scores. Most subjects who were responsive to medical cannabis reported experiencing, quote, no or mild side effects, end quote. Subjects also did not appear to develop long-term tolerance to the substances, as patients had no need to increase their dosage of medical cannabis over the duration of the study period. No improvements in patients' anxiety or depression scores were reported. Similarly to the findings of other studies, the majority of the trial subjects who responded favorably to cannabis therapy either discontinued or significantly reduced their consumption of prescription medications. The study's authors concluded, quote, the current study revealed the positive effects of medical cannabis therapy in some patients with fibromyalgia syndrome and resistance to conventional treatment. Thus, cannabinoids may be considered for fibromyalgia treatment, although several side effects may still occur. Further studies are warranted to confirm those findings, end quote. Numerous studies of fibromyalgia patients have concluded that cannabis is effective and well tolerated in patients with fibromyalgia. A growing number of patients with fibromyalgia are experimenting with cannabis products. This study's findings adds to the growing body of literature indicating that cannabis is a promising alternative therapeutic option for many of these patients. This study, Medical Cannabis for the Treatment of Fibromyalgia Syndrome, a retrospective open-label case series, appears in this month's edition of the Journal of Cannabis Research. Another story from Hackensack, New Jersey. The enactment of adult-use marijuana legalization laws is not independently associated with the rise in the percentage of motor vehicle crash victims testing positive for cannabis in hospitals, according to data published in the journal The American Surgeon. Researchers affiliated with Hackensack University Medical Center in New Jersey assessed trauma center patient data in states with and without adult-use legal marijuana laws over a 12-year period from 2006 to 2018. Investigators reported that the percentage of motor vehicle crash patients testing positive for cannabis increased over time in all the states: Arizona, California, Ohio, Oregon, New Jersey, and Texas. Overall, however, the greatest percentage change in cannabis positive drivers occurred in Texas, where marijuana remains strictly prohibited. By contrast, California and Oregon, two states that have legalized the adult use and sale of marijuana, were among the states that experienced the lowest percentage change over time. In a separate assessment, the authors did not identify any significant change in the percentage of motor vehicle accident patients testing positive for alcohol post-legalization. The authors determined, quote, there did not appear to be a relationship between the legalization of marijuana and the likelihood of finding THC in patients admitted after a motor vehicle crash. The authors concluded, quote, there is no apparent increase in the incidence of driving under the influence of marijuana after legalization, end quote. This study, Marijuana Legalization and Rates of Crashing Under the Influence of Tetrahydrocannabinol and Alcohol, appears in this month's edition of The American Surgeon. The enactment of state-specific adult-use marijuana legalization is associated with the decline in the number of workers' compensation claims filed, according to a new National Bureau of Economic Research paper. A team of researchers from the RAND Corporation, the University of Cincinnati, Temple University, and Wayne University assessed the relationship between adult use marijuana access and worker compensation claims among adults ages 40 to 62. They reported that legalization was independently associated with both a decline in the number of older employees filing worker compensation claims, as well as a reduction in the total amount of financial benefits paid out in successful claims. The authors emphasized, quote, these results are not driven by pre-existing trends. The observed reduction in workers' compensation benefits was not due to a concurrent decrease in labor supply, mechanically reducing worker compensation participation, are due to industry composition shifts which led to a higher share of the workforce in safer industries. Instead, we observe an increase in labor supply due to recreational marijuana law adoption, which is further in line with recreational marijuana laws improving work capacity among older adults, end quote. Overall, older workers in states where cannabis access was legalized for adults report a 20% decline in worker compensation filings as compared to control states where cannabis had not been legalized. In addition, annual income received from successful worker compensation claims declined 20.5% in states after they legalized marijuana. The authors concluded, quote, "The present study provides empirical evidence of the consequences of marijuana legalization on issues related to the labor market outcomes, in particular worker compensation claims of older adults. Our findings suggest potential important benefits to older workers and society at large. Broadly, we show non-trivial improvements in work capacity, which we proxy with worker compensation benefit receipt and various other metrics in our mechanism analysis among older adults," end quote. Previous research has identified a similar decline in workers' compensation filings following the enactment of medical marijuana laws. That study, published in 2020, concluded, quote, "On the net, the available findings suggest that medical marijuana law passage may increase work capacity among older adults, reduce work absences, improve workplace safety, and reduce worker compensation claiming and the pain and suffering associated with workplace injuries," end quote. Those findings ought to assuage the concerns that liberalizing cannabis criminal status might somehow negatively impact workplace productivity or safety. The empirical data to date does not substantiate such fears. In fact, it alleviates them. This study, "Does Marijuana Legalization Affect Workplace Capacity?" Evidence from worker compensation benefits, is available from the National Bureau of Economic Research. Our last story tonight is also on the medical use of marijuana. The inhalation of herbal cannabis is associated with clinical improvements and increased quality of life in patients with mild to moderate ulcerative colitis, according to randomized placebo-controlled trial data published in the journal PLOS One. Israeli researchers compared herbal cannabis versus placebo over an 8-week period in 32 patients with ulcerative colitis. Twice daily, participants inhaled cannabis cigarettes containing either 16% THC or virtually no THC, the placebo, in addition to their standard medications. The researchers reported, quote, "From a clinical perspective, we found that treatment with cannabis led to a significant reduction in disease activity, an 8-item measure designed to assess disease activity in patients with ulcerative colitis across 8 symptoms, and improvements in major irritable bowel disease related clinical symptoms, including abdominal pain and number of bowel movements per day. We also observed a significant improvement in quality of life, general health, appetite, libido, concentration, and patient satisfaction with the treatment," end quote. The authors of the study concluded, "This study demonstrates that treatment with THC-rich cannabis in patients with mild to moderate ulcerative colitis is associated with clinical improvements. This preliminary observation requires additional investigation in larger and longer intervention clinical studies. Such studies will enable us to determine whether cannabis has mainly a symptom-relieving role or a more specific anti-inflammatory therapeutic effect," end quote. Survey data indicate that cannabis use is relatively common among patients with inflammatory bowel diseases, and observational data has previously shown that cannabis may alleviate symptoms of certain irritable bowel disease-related disorders like Crohn's. This study, "Cannabis is associated with clinical but not endoscopic remission of ulcerative colitis, a randomized controlled trial," appears online. That's the end of our hemp news segment tonight. We have an interview coming up, but first I want to remind you that if you or a loved one are searching for a doctor anywhere in the United States that can help you qualify for a medical marijuana permit in your state, then give us a call. Our number here in Portland, Oregon is 503-235-4606. That's 503-235-4606. Stay tuned for our interview and help us restore hemp. Okay, I would like to introduce Fernando Jose Hanau from Cali, Colombia, who is my gracious host for Copa Falerones, a cannabis judging contest coming up at the end of March. I think it's March 28th, 29th, 30th, and April 1st. And because Fernando speaks English better than I speak Spanish, but he has a translator to help translate English.
It's okay.
Yeah, my Spanish is non-existent.
Su español no existe.
Es como mi inglés.
Just like his English.
Just a few words. So tell us about Copa Falerones. Is this the 4th or 5th year?
Cuéntanos de la Copa Farallones. ¿Este es el cuarto, quinto año?
Estamos en la cuarta edición.
This is the fourth edition.
Estamos en la cuarta edición.
This is the fourth edition.
Empezamos a hacerla en el 2016.
We started in 2016.
Y la estamos planteando como un intercambio cultural entre naciones en torno al cannabis.
And we have been focusing on the international exchange about cannabis knowledge.
Hemos tenido experiencias el año pasado con México y nuestro campeón fue a la Copa México y el campeón de la Copa México vino a Cali a ser jurado.
We had this experience last year with the Mexican Cup where our winner from Colombia went to Mexico and the winner from Mexico came to Colombia.
Y este año estamos haciéndolo con Argentina y la Copa del Plata.
This year we're doing it with Argentina and the Silver Cup.
Copa del Plata.
Copa del Plata. That's the name of the place.
Rio del Plata River.
Of the river, yes.
Y la Copa del Plata lleva 19 ediciones, es la más antigua del continente.
This cup has had 19 editions and is the oldest of the continent.
The oldest. I've heard of it.
Sí, que él ha escuchado eso.
Entonces, pues nuestra idea es compartir con otras naciones en torno a los concursos, a las copas de canábicas.
So our idea is to... Nuestra idea es que tienen que ser más cortas porque...
Ya. Nuestra idea es hacer este intercambio con otras naciones.
Our idea is to make this exchange with other nations.
Donde el cannabis esté en proceso de legalización o en legalización.
Where cannabis is in the process of legalization or is legalized already.
I see.
Entonces, tenemos algunos países en cola como Uruguay.
We have different
Jamaica,
countries that are waiting, like Uruguay, Jamaica.
Y pues siempre estamos abiertos a cualquier invitación.
And we're always open for invitations.
I see. Great. So with the Copa Falerones, tell our audience about Cali and about what will happen at the Copa Falerones.
Que con la Copa Farallones, cuéntales un poco de qué va la Copa, un poco de Cali y de cómo funciona el evento.
Bueno, nuestro evento está conformado por tres componentes.
Our event has three main components.
Un componente privado,
A private component,
donde realizamos las catas junto con los jurados y evaluamos las variedades.
Where we realize where we have we taste the different strains and aprueban las catas.
Calificamos.
And we qualificate them.
Tenemos un componente público que es una feria comercial.
There's a public component, which is a commercial fair.
Donde podemos encontrar música, están comerciales.
Where we can find music, commercial stands, like stores, como tiendas y...
tiendas y como toda la industria nacional.
Like stores and the national industry.
Y donde podemos también tener espacios audiovisuales.
Where we can also have audiovisual spaces.
Y tenemos fiesta y música.
And we have party and music.
También
So-
tenemos un componente académico,
And the last component is the academic component,
que es un componente gratuito hacia la comunidad,
which is a free component for the community,
donde tenemos varios ponentes
where we have different talks
de distintas partes del mundo,
from different parts around the world,
paralelo a las actividades de la Copa.
which are parallel to the other activities in the cup.
So the fair with the booths, is that just for one day or is that for multiple days?
La feria y todo el
No.
evento, ¿es solo por un día o por varios días?
El evento es por 5 días.
The event is for 5 days.
Tenemos el componente privado, que son las catas, una por categoría,
The private event, we have one per category,
en distintos sitios de la ciudad.
which is tasting the different brands in parts of the city.
Cada cata está concebida está concebida en su ambientación, dependiendo del efecto que evaluemos.
No sé cómo decir cata.
Testing.
Each testing, it's invented so you can try it in different parts of the city and you can enjoy the effect the weed has in your body.
Entonces, para la cata de sativas tenemos un río.
So for the sativa tries, we have a river.
Para la cata de indica tenemos una terraza.
For the indica tries, we have a rooftop.
Para las extracciones tenemos una casa en la montaña.
For the extractions, we have a house in the mountains.
Y procuramos desde lo musical potenciar los efectos que estemos revisando.
And we try that with the music help the different effects that we are having.
I see. That sounds really exciting. So if someone...
También tenemos una cata con los jardineros.
We also have a try with the gardeners.
Growers. With the growers. Y tenemos, porque la calificación es ponderada, una parte los jurados y otra parte los growers.
Because the grades qualifications are divided between the growers and the juries.
I see. So are tickets available for people to come to the fair, or if someone wants
para ir a la
sí, tenemos entradas, tickets para el evento público.
We have tickets for the public event.
Y tenemos entradas a las catas solo para invitados.
And for the tries, there's only you can go with an invitation.
Y jurados.
And the juries.
Sure. So if someone is interested in coming to the fair and the music, how would they buy tickets? They wanted to come. The people who are interested, who've asked me, how can I come to Colombia?
¿Cómo puedo ir a Colombia para?
Pues las fronteras con Estados Unidos están libres.
The good thing is that
Open.
They're open the frontiers, so we can travel from the US to Colombia.
Solo tienen que tener una prueba de COVID.
You just need a COVID test.
Y puedes llegar fácilmente.
And you can easily come. You can. Dale.
Bueno, pueden encontrar información en nuestra página web.
You can find information in our webpage.
Donde puedes registrarte como jardinero.
Where you can register as a grower.
Jurado.
A jury.
Puedes adquirir un stand dentro de la feria.
You can get an stand over the ferry.
O presencia comercial en las catas.
Or a commercial presence at the tries.
Y también puede vivir la experiencia de ser jurado por un día.
And you can also live the experience of being a jury for a day.
Y ya esas es como nuestras formas de vinculación.
And that's our vinculation forms.
So Um, I'm really looking forward to it, of course. So if someone, tell us the website and the cost if someone wanted to come. I know it's
La página web y el precio.
Oh, bueno, nuestra página web es www.copafarallones.com.
Our web page is www.copafarallones.com.
Tienes el precio para ir a la feria comercial está en unos $5.
The price for the commercial part is around $5.
Y si quieres asistir a las catas, te cuesta $50.
And if you want to come to the tries, it's around $50.
Y si quieres tener la experiencia de jurado por los 5 días, puedes tenerla por $400.
And if you want to have the experience of jury for 5 days, you can have it for around $400.
sounds like a good deal.
Una vez te registres en la página, te llegan instrucciones sobre cómo va a ser.
Once you register on the page, you're going to get the instructions and information about how to do it.
También tenemos hospedajes disponibles.
We also have different hostings and hotels to stay.
Y tenemos actividades posteriores al evento.
And we also have activities after the event.
Como visitas a las granjas.
Like visits to the farms.
Y tenemos una actividad posterior que se llama la Cata del Pacífico.
And we also have another activity that's called the Tries at the Pacifico.
Que es como nuestra actividad familiar.
Which is our family activity.
Es como una cata en la playa.
Which is a try in a beach.
So there'll be a trip to the beach.
Sí, que va a haber un viaje a la playa.
Sí, tenemos un viaje a la playa.
Sí, yes. After the event, they have a trip to the beach.
Oh, all right, on the Pacific Ocean, not the Caribbean.
It's not the Caribbean, it's the Pacific.
Yeah, the Pacific. Pacifico. Okay, great.
Yeah, Pacifico.
Well, that's exciting. I know the biodiversity and the range of wildlife in Colombia is just amazing.
Bueno, sí, claro. De hecho, las visitas a las granjas son muy interesantes porque...
Of course, actually, the visits to the farms are very interesting because...
Porque son en territorios indígenas.
It's in indigenous territory.
All right. I visited there in 2016 and came to Cali, but this will be... And I've been to Medellin several times, but this will be just my second trip to Cali.
Recuerdo que nos vimos en Medellín.
He recalled seeing you in Medellin.
Yeah. Well, it'd be good to see you again. I really appreciate the invitation. I know LV Masica is looking forward to it. LV is a very famous activist, not just here in the United States, but around the world. But perhaps most significantly, she is from Cali. So this is a homecoming.
Sí, sí, he estado conversando con Elvi y me dice que su familia es de Cali y de Finlandia.
He's been talking to Elvi and she told him that her family is from Cali and from Finlandia.
Y en realidad estamos muy contentos de recibirla en Cali. Y,
and we're very happy to have her here in Cali.
A todo el que le cuento su historia le parece increíble.
And everyone that knows her story thinks it's amazing, unbelievable.
Yeah, she is an incredible person. She was the first woman to be given free medical marijuana from the United States. The third person, but the first woman. And since 1988, they have given her 10 joints a day, 300 joints a month.
Porros al día, 300 al mes.
Yo he estado leyendo sobre ella.
I've been reading a lot about her.
Y es una persona muy interesante y me parece que tiene mucho que aportar.
And she is an amazing person, which he thinks has a lot to give.
She certainly does. She was also a judge at the very first High Times Cannabis Cup in Amsterdam back in
Sí, sí, estuve leyendo sobre eso y hablando con ella, también sé que canta y declama.
He's been reading about it and also talking to her. He knows that she also sings and reads poetry.
does. She's has several CDs out.
Que
And
tiene
so,
Sí, eso me parece adorable.
he thinks that's adorable.
yeah, it was exciting for me. I brought her back to Cali in 2016.
Él la trajo a Cali en
Producer
2016.
William, who's recording, he and I drove cars from Medellin to Cali to Toribio.
Mandaron de Medellín a Cali, al Caribe.
No tuve la oportunidad de encontrarme en esa ocasión.
He didn't have the chance to meet you at that time.
Right. We then drove over to Bogota and then back to Medellin to turn our rental cars back in 2016.
En 2016.
En realidad es un viaje muy pesado el que hiciste,
That's a really long trip you did.
pero estamos muy contentos de poder recibirte en Cali
But we're very happy to have you now in Cali,
y esperamos tener gente de toda Colombia acompañándonos.
and we also expect to have a lot of people around Colombia with us.
I have been telling my friends in Colombia about it as well, that they should meet me there, and I think a few of them will. So, I'm looking much.
Estamos felices de recibirlos a todos y servir como un canal de integración entre todas las personas que trabajen con cannabis en Colombia.
We're very happy to have you, and we're also excited to be the channel of integration between the cannabis community in Colombia.
That's great. That's great. Well, we're happy to participate as well. Thank you for the invitation. So, I know that Elvie is really looking forward to it as well. So everything will go just well. We look forward to arriving there soon. So again, if someone wants to, they go to your website to look into coming at copafalerones.com. We'll have some pictures we'll put up to show your website. You know,
La página web para más información.
Y nuestras redes, también en nuestras redes de Instagram y Facebook.
Also in our social media, Instagram and Facebook, you can find us.
Y ahí pueden obtener información.
Y el nombre.
Se llama Copa Farallones.
The same name, Copa Farallones.
Copa Canábica Farallones.
Copa Canábica Farallones. For the Instagram and Facebook. And you can get the information over there too.
Very good. What does Farallones mean? Is that like cliffs?
¿Qué significa Farallones?
Farallones es la cordillera que rodea nuestra ciudad.
The Farallones is the mountain trail that surrounds our city.
Nosotros vivimos en un valle rodeado de montañas.
We live in a valley surrounded by mountains.
Y las montañas, la cadena montañosa que está al frente es el Parque Nacional Los Farallones.
And the mountain chain we have over here, it's called the Parque Nacional Farallones.
Una reserva natural.
It's a natural reserve.
I see. Like I said, the wildlife in Colombia is just incredible. With
La diversidad es increíble.
and
Por eso puedes ver en todos nuestros pósters.
That's why you see in all of our posters.
Las montañas siempre está la copa es los farallones.
The mountains always. That's why it's Copa Farallones.
All right, that's good to know. So, is there anything you'd like to say in closing, Fernanda?
¿Hay algo más que quieras decir para cerrar?
Que todos son bienvenidos. Estamos muy contentos de tenerte acá en nuestro país.
Everyone is invited, and we're very happy to have you here in our country.
Y esperamos que esta edición sea mucho mejor que todas las anteriores.
And we expect that this edition is going to be better than all the...
En realidad estamos preparando una experiencia inolvidable.
We're really trying to prepare an unforgettable experience.
It sounds like it is. I'm very much looking forward to it. One of the requirements is to have a COVID test 96 hours before Colombia. I'm planning for that. I and my had our vaccine to stop COVID as well. So, but we're going to get the test before coming so that we don't have that test. Then I think you're required to quarantine. So people are
Yo vi que
coming.
te vacunaste.
He saw you got the vaccine.
I did.
Pero que igual se hace la prueba.
Sí. Bueno, es importante de todas formas hacerse la prueba.
It's important anyways to have the test.
Yeah, you have to have that anyway. All right, well, thank you very much again, Fernanda, Jose, Hanal from Copa Falarones in Cali, Colombia. I'm going to be there about 4 weeks from now with Elvi Masica and my wife, Teresa. So we're really looking forward to that.
Bueno, pues,
Thanks for coming on our show, Cannabis Common Sense.
Gracias por venir a nuestro show.
estamos esperándolos con los brazos abiertos. Muchas gracias por venir.
We're waiting with open arms. Thank you for coming.
Y muchas gracias por la invitación a tu programa.
And thank you for inviting me to your program, to your show.
My pleasure. I hope people find out more about the incredible legacy of cannabis culture and throughout Colombia.
Agradecemos mucho tu apoyo.
We appreciate your support.
My pleasure. Thank you. Good night.
Bueno, good night.